Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome back to my channel. So, we are still talking about Shakespeare, still discussing Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 5, but we're finally at the actual romantic pairing of the play. Actually, not quite true. We're still going to be focusing mostly on Romeo in this video because we're going to be dissecting the moment that he first lays eyes on Juliet. But before that, really quick, let's recap the last couple of videos I made on this scene, just in case you missed them. So Act 1 introduces us to all of the major characters and key plot elements of the play. First thing we learn about is the Capulet-Montague feud, how violent it is, and how easily the violence is sparked between the two families. Then we meet Tybalt and Benvolio, a pair of foil characters. One represents peace, the other represents violence. We get a brief encounter with Romeo's parents, Lord and Lady Montague, but I wouldn't actually call them main characters in this. They appear here in this scene, and then Lord Montague shows up at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, which is the scene where everyone stabs everybody else. And then he's back at the very end of the play when Romeo and Juliet have killed themselves. I'm not sure, but I don't think Romeo's mother appears again at all. And this is in stark contrast to Juliet's parents, and especially Juliet's father, who continues to appear throughout the play. And what this contrast highlights is how differently sons and daughters were treated in Shakespeare's time. Romeo, as a man, is allowed to pretty much move freely without any parental oversight, whereas Juliet's life is tightly controlled by her family and in particular by her father. So it actually makes sense that her parents show up more during the play and Romeo's are kind of just like background characters. We of course meet Romeo and learn that he's a very emotional young man, currently in love, or at the very least infatuated, with a girl named Rosaline, but that's soon to change. His emotions are very much front and center. He feels deeply and he's not afraid to express that. That's very important to keep in mind for this video. In scenes 2 and 3, we meet Paris, Juliet's suitor, her parents, and Juliet herself. What we learn about her is that she's very young, very inexperienced, and not really all that interested in love or marriage. We'll see if that's going to change when she meets Romeo in the next video. I didn't really talk all that much about Mercutio, who we meet in scene 4 of Act 1, mainly because I analyze his Queen Mab speech in a Patreon exclusive video that you can check out on my Patreon account if you like. Link is in the description down below. What's most important about him to keep in mind is that he's basically an anti-Romeo. He's witty, cynical, and pragmatic, where Romeo is wistful, romantic, and idealistic. Act 1, Scene 5 opens with the servants hectically making some last-minute preparations for the Capulet ball. This frantic atmosphere contrasts nicely with the moment we are just about to look at. Then Lord Capulet steps onto the scene and officially opens the festivities. I talked at length in last week's video about how the first impression we get of him, both in this scene and in scene 2, where we first meet him, is that he is a friendly older gentleman who's very protective of his daughter. He doesn't want her to get married too soon, but also grants her enough agency to let her have a choice in who she marries, or who she wants to marry. He's invited Paris to this ball so that he can woo her for himself, and so that Juliet will actually want to marry him when the time comes. Tybalt, as we've also talked about in last week's video, is a pretty static character, and that's by design. He's not supposed to have any character development because he's there to prove a point, namely that too much anger and pride can be deadly. He gets enraged by Romeo's mere presence at the ball and immediately wants to kill him. Lord Capulet then steps in and tells him to calm down and to leave Romeo be. This leads to a huge argument between the two, one where Lord Capulet starts off reasonably calm, but gets more and more enraged by the minute, until he eventually threatens Tybalt to be quiet, or for shame I'll make you be quiet. This both foreshadows his loss of temper with Juliet in Act 3, Scene 5, when he orders her to marry Paris and she disobeys him, but also shows his lack of authority and the limited influence the older generation has over the younger one. I think this is also something we can see in Romeo's parents' limited presence in the play. they can't control or stop Romeo from doing stupid things. The argument between Tybalt and Lord Capulet also showcases two of the larger themes of the play. The first being moderation versus impulsivity, where impulsivity consistently seems to win out, but with disastrous consequences, like everybody dying. And the second one is age versus youth. I already touched on that with Lord Capulet's and Romeo's parents' limited amount of control over their offspring. Right. Now that we're all up to date, let's jump into the first outwardly romantic moment of the play, the moment Romeo first sees Juliet. Okay, here goes. This is what Romeo says when he first lays eyes on Juliet from across the dance floor. Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night as a rich jewel on an Ethiop's ear. Beauty too rich for use, for earth too dear. So shows a snowy dove trooping with crows, as yonder lady o'er her fellows shows. The measure done, I'll watch her place of stand, and touching hers, make blessed my rude hand. Did my heart love till now, forswear its sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night. First of all, this is a poem. It has a meter, a rhyme scheme, the whole package. I mean, we've already talked about how a lot of the characters in Shakespeare talk in verse that's written in iambic pentameter, so that's not new. But notice how each two lines form a rhyming pair: night, bright, ear, dear, and so on. So now we have a rhyme scheme on top of the iambic pentameter. Actually, the rhyming pairs also aren't that unusual for Shakespeare. He uses them for another character in this very play, namely the prince. In the prince's case, the rhyming is used to elevate his speech and set him apart from the squabbling families. It marks him as dignified, authoritative, and above the chaos. In this case, it's also done in order to elevate Romeo's speech, but not so much to set him apart from the rest of the characters, more to set this moment apart from everything else that's happening in this scene. Shakespeare is literally signaling to his audience, hey, pay attention, this moment's important. And he's doing it through the way Romeo is speaking. Something else to consider here, and something that I haven't really talked about all that much in the previous videos, is how to set this moment in scene. That's something you kind of always have to keep in mind when you're doing a stage production, how to position the characters, what to do with the lighting, the sound, etc. I don't remember if this was in the first stage production I saw of this play, which was literally my first theater experience ever, or in a recording of a different production that I saw later on. But in at least one of these, the director chose to basically freeze the moment and freeze the entire cast on stage, except for Romeo, and kill all the lights except for the ones on Juliet and I think Romeo too. So basically everything was on pause while Romeo was delivering this poem. And I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I think he was moving closer and closer to Juliet the further on he got with his lines. And then when the scene unfroze, he was right in front of Juliet, and that's when she first laid eyes on him. But I'm not 100% sure. The last time I saw Romeo and Juliet on stage was many, many years ago. Like I said, the first time I read this play was when I was 13, and then I saw the first stage production when I was 15. So quite a while ago. Anyway, back to the analysis. There is a question to be asked here on whether Romeo's elevated poetic speech signifies his deep and instant connection to Juliet and the genuineness of his feelings for her, or whether it's just another intense infatuation like it was with Rosaline. Now, on the one hand, this poem does read as very romantic. He's talking about how pretty he thinks Juliet is, how she shines above everything and everyone else, how fiercely attracted he is to her. All things you'd kind of expect from someone falling in love at first sight. And the way he's talking could be Shakespeare's way of lampshading to the audience how deeply and instantly he's falling in love with Juliet. But there is another way of reading this. Romeo has always talked in a very poetic and dramatic way. I've talked about this in the video I did on his first appearance. So the way he's talking to and about Juliet here isn't really out of character for him. And it's not all that different to the way he talked about Rosaline either. The only real difference is that when talking about Rosaline, he was miserable because she'd made herself unavailable to him, and now he's positively elated by the sight of Juliet. And that's another thing. He's not talking about discovering love for the first time. He's loudly proclaiming that he's fallen in love. It's very performative and could easily be read as a sign of his youthful impulsivity. Now, I'm not saying either way of reading this is right. I'm just saying that both of these interpretations exist. Where you land on this is up to you, really. I will say, though, that when I first read Romeo and Juliet, like I said, I was 13, and I didn't even question whether Romeo and Juliet's feelings for each other were genuine or not. I just assumed that they were. I thought that's what love's supposed to be like, all grandiose declarations and swept up emotions. Now that I'm older, I can see the other side of the argument. It does read like youthful infatuation to me now, the way it often feels when you experience love for the first time. However, I do want to put out there that just because it's your first time experiencing something doesn't mean it's less valid. It sometimes drives me mad when adults pretend that the way teenagers experience love or heartbreak or anger or sadness is overly dramatic. Of course, it is. It's their first time experiencing these things. I bet the first time you scraped your knee, you cried the hardest because it was the worst pain you'd ever felt. But then you got older and you fell off your bike and you broke your arm, and then that was the worst pain you ever experienced. It's all a matter of experience and perspective. And a lot of the times, I feel like adults forget that when it comes to teenagers. We were all young ones, and we all fell in love for the first time at some point. I guess, unless you're aromantic, which is totally valid, by the way. But for the vast majority, we do fall in love at some point in our lives. And that is the first time we ever experience these things. And in those moments, that was the most elevated we ever felt. That was the most in love we ever felt. That was the most heartbroken we ever felt. And that's how I see Romeo and Juliet now. Yes, they're impulsive. Yes, they're a bit reckless. Yes, they get a little carried away. And yes, it ends very tragically. But they're young. They're kids. Like, Juliet is literally 13. And like I said in, I think it was the previous video, we don't know how old Romeo is exactly, but he's also still very young. Don't tell me that makes their experience less valid. And don't tell me you didn't get carried away about something when you were their age as well. All I'm saying is maybe cut Romeo and Juliet some slack. Yes, they're young, and yes, the play ends very badly, but it doesn't make their experience and their feelings less valid, even though they are fictional characters. Anyway, let's get back to what he's actually saying in this big romantic moment. His first line is, "Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright." It's a striking metaphor with which Romeo is saying that Juliet is the only true source of light in the room. Even the torches, remember this takes place in a time where there was no electricity, seem dim by comparison. Next he says, "It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night as a rich jewel on an Ethiop's ear." Firstly, we have a personification of the night. Night doesn't have any cheeks, but Juliet hangs upon the cheek of night, meaning she stands out against the darkness of the room. The torches wouldn't have lit the room very well. He also calls Juliet a jewel here. To a modern audience, this might read as slight objectification because he's comparing her to an object, but in Shakespeare's days, this would have been seen as a huge compliment. He's comparing her to something rare and priceless. So he's basically saying that her beauty is rare and something very precious. But we also have to talk about the fact that the jewel hangs on an Ethiop's ear. Now, Ethiop refers to someone from Ethiopia, so Africa, so a person of color. Essentially, he's saying that her brilliance, and specifically her whiteness, is what makes her stand out so much. And that's why this line reads slightly uncomfortably to a modern audience. I'm not saying ban the play or change the lines, unless you're doing a modern interpretation, in which case, please, by all means, change the lines. But what I'm saying is be aware that there are certain things in a 400-year-old play that may not have been viewed as problematic back then, but we can certainly question it now. Moving on to the next line, beauty too rich for use, for earth too dear. Here, Romeo's basically saying that Juliet's beauty is too precious for this earth. It's the same kind of logic as when people compare others to an angel. That's like saying, your kindness is too good to be from this world. Romeo's saying that, but in relation to Juliet's beauty. It's also slightly hyperbolic, a little over the top, if you will, which I think is meant to show how overwhelmed Romeo is by the sight of her and her beauty. Then we have, so shows a snowy dove trooping with crows, as yonder lady o'er her fellows shows. This is a callback to something Benvolio said to him in line 89 of Act 1, Scene 2. And I will make thee think thy swan a crow. In that scene, Benvolio was talking about Rosaline, and he was basically saying to Romeo, come to the Capulet party tonight and look at all the pretty girls dancing, and you'll forget all about your precious Rosaline. So I think Romeo might owe Benvolio some money because he was absolutely right with this. As soon as Romeo sees Juliet, he forgets all about Rosaline and thinks of everyone else in the room as crows. Unfortunately, we have to come back to the possible racist connotations here. Romeo is contrasting Juliet with everyone else in the room by calling her a snowy dove, which is a white bird, and the others as crows, a bird whose feathers are black. Now, this metaphor once again relies pretty heavily on color contrast, where white equals good, or in this case, pretty, and black equals bad or ugly. And I wouldn't necessarily call this overt racism, but it's the same thing I've seen people point out in Taylor Swift's song Opalite on her most recent album. In the song, she sings, sleepless in the awnings night, but now the sky is opalite. Onyx is a black gemstone, while opalite is a man-made white stone. So in the dark, dark night, someone was sleepless, but now the sky is white or clear, so times are better. And I just want to say that neither Shakespeare nor Taylor Swift came up with this, not even by a long shot. It's something that runs pretty consistently through Western society. Even in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, God creates light and separates it from darkness. We call it the Dark Ages because we assume people were ignorant at the time, and then we move into the Age of Enlightenment because it was an age of discovery and knowledge. We call someone a light in our darkness. We blacklist things that aren't allowed. It's very consistent in our language, and it is something that is built on this metaphor of white equals good and black equals bad. And like I said, I don't think we can call this overt racism, but it is something to keep an eye out in our time. Okay, on to the next bit of the poem. Romeo says, and touching hers, make blessed my rude hand. Here he's doing a bit of self-deprecation. He's calling his own hand rude, which means rough or unrefined. One, this hints at his own sense of unworthiness. And that's going to come back in a big way for the sonnet that we're going to discuss next video. And two, this makes Juliet seem more delicate, refined, or even more beautiful by comparison. Once again, he's elevating her beauty, but he's also putting himself down in the process. And three, blessed has a very clear religious connotation. So it's a bit of a hint toward the religious imagery that is about to come in his and Juliet's shared sonnet. Again, next week's video. And then we come to the dramatic closing. Did my heart love till now, forswear its sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night. In these lines, he's questioning the love he thought he felt for Rosaline, because in his mind, it doesn't compare to what he's feeling now. He thinks that now he's seen Juliet, he understands the true meaning of love and beauty, and this is emphasized by the fact that he calls Juliet a true beauty in the final line. Okay, so we've made it to the end of the poem. There are two things left that I'd like to mention before we can wrap this video up. The first is that this incredibly romantic moment is immediately interrupted by Tybalt's fury. Like, the audience barely has a moment to process Romeo's sheer awe of Juliet before Tybalt cuts in with, "This by his voice should be a Montague. Fetch me my rapier, boy." So immediately after Romeo's heartfelt declaration of love, we have Tybalt over here seething with rage. This almost instantly reminds the audience that Romeo and Juliet's love is doomed to fail, because right from the get-go, it's caught in their family's hatred of each other. And the second thing ties into the first. It's Juliet's reaction when she finds out that Romeo is a Montague at the end. Immediately, she's very sad and very conflicted. She says, "My only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown, and no too late. Prodigious birth of love it is to me, that I must love my loathed enemy." Once again, we have the immediate juxtaposition of love and hate, and again, it's placed in the same lines. My only love sprung from my only hate, and that I must love my loathed enemy. So it's the same situation as with Tybalt. Love is always put side by side with hate. One cannot escape the other. The other thing that Juliet's words show is how torn she is. She's speaking in antitheses. That's when you place two opposing ideas right next to each other. Only love versus only hate, love versus loathed, and so on. This shows that while she may be in love with Romeo, she also wants to be loyal to her family. So she's caught between her feelings and her sense of duty. And the last thing I want to highlight is this line: "Too early seen unknown, and known too late." This line seems almost prophetic. It has a very strong connection to fate. It suggests that destiny has already outrun Juliet and the tragic ending is already written. And I mean, we already know that it is. This is the moment that Romeo and Juliet become the pair of star-crossed lovers that the prologue says they are. This is where everything locks into place, and neither Romeo nor Juliet can outrun their fate anymore. All right, time to conclude this video. I'll try to wrap this up quickly because it's already running on the longer side, but here we go. So the instant Romeo lays eyes on Juliet, he falls in love with her, declaring her the most beautiful person he's ever seen. He calls her a rich jewel as well as a snowy dove, comparisons that are meant to show her as rare, precious, and pure. I didn't go into it in the analysis, but the color white is also associated with purity, especially in those times. That's why wedding dresses are traditionally white, because the bride is meant to be pure. This romantic moment is immediately contrasted with Tybalt's rage-filled outbursts, proving that, in this play at least, love and hate can only exist side by side. Juliet's reaction to learning that Romeo is a Montague further reinforces this. Her love is entangled with her family's hatred, and their relationship is ultimately doomed. Her line, "Too early seen unknown, and known too late," echoes the prologue and marks them as the star-crossed lovers whose fate is already sealed. Next week, we're going to be looking at their first conversation, a sonnet filled to the brim with religious imagery. So stay tuned for that. For now, this is me, signing off. Let's try this one more time. Act 1. No, that was not a good take. Imagery. Awnings is a black. That was the wrong emphasis. Previous videos, Sheet made himself. Beauty too rich for use. Yeah. I always kind of think that the word should be youth, but that doesn't make any sense. Paris, like the city. That was actually not that bad. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and comment down below. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, starting at as little as $2 a month, which gives you early access to any of my videos. Higher tiers include access to exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest books, plays, or poems for any future analysis. For now, that is it from me, and I'll see you next time.